Good morning, Loretta, and welcome to the Creative Blog Around. And thank you so much for accepting this chat with us. I look forward to bringing to our viewers insights about your work and a lot more. So welcome.
Great, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Um, for everybody, this is Loretta Breuning. And A few months ago, I was suggested by one of our interviewees, Lisa Walters, to read this book,
Oh,
Habits
good.
of a Happy Brain. And while reading through it, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is so much and so relevant to performing artists in that it explains, basically, it gives a rundown of how our brain works, which is Loretta's contribution to the field, um, or at least the one I would like to bring about. So let's say, Loretta, my first question for you today is, in entering and experiencing a spotlight situation, could you explain to us what happens to the artist's brain and body as a consequence?
Well, I'm sure people have read a lot and heard a lot about this, so I'm just going to focus directly on my unique contribution.
Yeah.
So it's so easy to see that our neurons are connected from past experience. So when a person is in that situation, each person's response is based on their unique individual past experience. So the circuits you have depend on the surges of neurochemistry that you've had in the past, because those surges, you could think of them like paving on the roads of your brain. So one person might step into the limelight and expect the whole world to love them because that happened to them in their life. And another person might step into the limelight and expect everyone saying, oh, look what an idiot they are. Oh, look at their terrible, weird shirt isn't straight or something. Now, it doesn't pay to focus on other people are lucky because they have better circuits, because even the person who has very positive expectations is then going to be disappointed, because when they think they're king of the world, then the world is going to say, well, no, you're not really king of the world. So instead of keeping inventory for other people, we're better off at just focusing on how we can improve our own circuits.
That makes total sense. And that answers actually a question that I had for you, which is how can it be that when people show up on the stage, there are completely different reactions. Some people are energized by the spotlight.
Yes.
Some other people
Yes.
are completely drained. Some other people
Yes.
go into something that many call stage fright.
Yes. Yes.
So,
And it's interesting also with stage fright that people probably have read a little, like there's a physiology where it's a real sense of threat
yes.
that people will say, well, but it's not fair. I'm having a real reaction. Well, you are, but that's a learned reaction. Your body learned it long ago. And it helps to know that that was a reaction that was meant to promote survival. Because if a young child puts their hand in a fire, then that makes a huge pathway that tells you not to put your hand in a fire again. So anytime those chemicals turn on, they create a huge pathway, and the only solution is to build a new pathway.
Yes. So how is it that being in the spotlight with a lot of people looking at us might trigger a threat for survival reaction? So you say it's actually inherited because of the history of our brain and survival and evolution and so on and so forth. But what is the threat in that situation?
So, and by the way, I don't say inherited because, like I said, each individual built their circuit
Yes.
in their life experience.
Yes.
So what the threat is mammals live in groups for survival.
Yes.
And being excluded from the group is a survival threat in the animal world. Now, humans are born in a more vulnerable and helpless state than any other creature. So, like a horse can run with the herd in a few days, weeks. Reptiles leave home the minute they're born. So, humans take like a very long time to develop survival skills. So, during that time, any risk to your social support is a survival threat. So, any negative feedback that you anticipate, you could, in your past experience, have built a circuit that sees that as a loss of social support.
That's very interesting, and that explains a lot, actually, of what happens to many artists, and for no apparent reason. For no apparent reason.
Yes, and it's so, once that gate turns on, those chemicals are so powerful that it takes over. Now, when I say social support, there's two different kinds of social feelings and social chemicals in mammals. So one of them is the warm and fuzzy one that people like to talk about, which is oxytocin. And that's the feeling that I'm safe because I'm surrounded by the herd. And they're all more complicated. So we're not meant to release oxytocin all the time because that wouldn't be good for survival. So the animal brain makes careful decisions about when to release it. So am I safe now next to this particular individual? So for humans, those circuits are built from past experience. So I could tell you some amazing experiences I had in that regard. But now, the other chemical is serotonin. And that's what people don't like to talk about, this, that animals are very hierarchical. And they have a good feeling when they're the stronger of the one. And they have a bad feeling when they're in the weaker. So you can tell that we humans are constantly judging each other and comparing ourselves to others. And our mammal brain releases serotonin when we perceive I'm in the one-up position. And we release cortisol, the threat feeling, when we perceive I'm in the one-down position. But because of past experience, we're always generating expectations because your brain is always looking for, how can I get into the one-up position so that I can have that good feeling? Yeah. And then if I think I'm going to lose the one-up position, that feels like a survival threat. And now you understand with horses, so you can see how amazingly this all fits together.
Of course. They're extremely hierarchical indeed, and they know if they can challenge the horse in the lead position or not.
And they care. They're constantly looking for...
Yeah, the dynamics are redefining themselves constantly.
Yeah.
That's incredibly interesting.
You may have a performer who is in many ways a very nice person, but everyone gets sucked into these judgmental conversations when I'm watching someone else perform and everybody around me is judging them. So when you're the performer, your circuits are immediately going into that perception of them all judging you.
Mm-hmm. I might lose my status, I might lose my status, I might lose my status.
Yes.
Wow. And that, depending on past experience and all of that, might be an incredibly threatening feeling.
Yes.
And that explains a lot. Wow. So, connecting to this, this is for me an everlasting question. It's just ongoing. I keep digging into this, and I'm wondering what your point of view is about this. So, who reacts first? Our brain, our body, or our emotional self? And what are the spillover effects, and what's the order if there is a clear one? What's your take on that?
First, the simple final answer is they have to work together. There's no alternative in the end. But one good analogy that I heard is a human riding an elephant. That on the one hand, the human is making the decision, we need to go this way, we need to go that way. but he has to get the elephant to cooperate.
Yes.
Otherwise, he's in trouble. And the elephant has enough power to wipe out the human, you know?
Yes.
So how do you calm the inner mammal so that they're willing to work with you?
Mm-hmm. By all
Okay.
means. So it's there's no hierarchy among those three.
Good. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think you have to. So we would like to feel like our higher verbal cortex is in charge. So, and I am a big believer in free will. I don't believe any of these people who say there's no free will. The point is that the power of the higher part is tiny. So if you know what that power is, and the main power that it is, interestingly, is to put on the brakes and to say, I don't like what this inner mammal is doing. I'm going to stop. And then when you stop, you give your inner mammal time to generate a new response, which is mostly by metabolizing the cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Cortisol, once it's released, it's in you and it tells you to look for potential threats.
Mm-hmm.
So once it's turned on, you feel like you're being chased by a lion and you're looking for a tree to climb. And we survive because we ignore everything else in a moment of threat and only focus on the threat. But if you give the cortisol time to metabolize, now obviously once you're already on stage, you can't do that.
Yes.
So you need other alternative strategies, but first to understand how it works. So an alternative strategy would be in the moment where I feel threatened, that I can direct my electricity into a different circuit, and I have to create that circuit in advance so that it's big enough to compete with that old circuit that's already so huge from my past emergencies.
By all means.
And how would I build it in advance is repetition. So first I plan the new circuit, and then I repeat it, and then I make my energy available for it. So what would the alternative circuit be? And just a very simple example that I would use in your case is I like to say that I think other people are saying positive things about me.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine other people saying positive things about me. And it's hard to do this, right? Because it sounds obnoxious and too proud. But you have to do that in advance to create in your brain the expectation that this will be well received.
Absolutely. I get it. And there is a part of your book, Habits of a Happy Brain, in which you talk about experience and how repetition of experiences helps creating those neural pathways that you're talking about. When I read that, I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's right there one explanation of why what I teach is artist development through interaction with horses. And how I like to think about it is horses are sensitive animals, and long story short, they mirror whatever we bring out, whatever however we show up to the world, okay? And I think about it as simulating certain situations where, say, instead of your orchestra members, you have a herd of horses. Instead of your audience, you have a herd of horses. Instead of the conductor who is on stage, and you would enter the stage as a soloist, shake his hand, bow and tune, and then start, we have a horse. And we observe and interact. And if properly facilitated, there's a lot to learn from that. In a very experiential way. So when I read what you were saying about experience and repetition, I was like, that's it. This is one explanation why it's so important to go through these simulations. Because, of course, you can do what common knowledge wants you to do, which, the more you do it, the better you get at it. But if you don't have the right constructive,
That's
energizing neural pathways to do it, your risk is to go the other way
yes,
instead.
because then you're just building the old panic circuit. Every time you panic, you're building up that circuit. Yes, that's a
Yes,
good.
yes.
Another good example about horses is when I try to interact with the horse, and Lisa maybe told you that I went and spent a day with her and her horses,
Yes.
and I also went to the UK and spent a day with Harriet, who does the horse course there. She actually does horse learning for juvenile offenders.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, and the idea is that the horse is judging you. So it's a good example of how to be comfortable in the situation where the horse might like me, but they might not like me. So
Exactly.
I have to still manage the same feelings and end up with a positive expectation of, oh, I can make it work with the horse, but it's not a given. So I have to manage my inner mammal as it interacts with their inner mammal.
Exactly, exactly. I wouldn't necessarily say that the horse is judging you, but they are really honest in wanting to connect or not wanting to connect, depend of what sort of feelings and energy and so on we project around them.
But the
So,
horse is also judging, am I stronger than you or weaker than you?
oh, in that sense, yeah. So he's trying, or she is trying to make a judgment call about, should I test this person's leadership, or is it super clear already? That for sure, it's their nature. Absolutely, yeah. So um, about all these, I just wanted to take a moment to tell our viewers that if this went too fast, in you hearing all these hormones and reactions and strategies and so on, you can also always go to innermammalinstitute.org, which is Loretta's platform that she's created, in which she shares. There's a very inclusive blog. There's the list of all her books. There's a lot of very useful information that she shares regarding her work on
And there's videos and slideshows and every format that a person might want.
There you go, which I highly suggest because it's once again incredibly relevant to performing artists and in particular to peak performance. So, speaking of peak performance, Loretta, what are the hormones? So how does the brain and the body look like in this snapshot of when a person is in a peak performance state?
Well, when you use that expression, I think you're probably thinking about flow, right? Is that what you're
Yes,
thinking about?
different disciplines call it in a with different denominations. So it's flow in psychology, it's peak performance in sports
Okay.
psychology, it's
Okay.
called coherence in physiology, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Well, I have my own language. I've studied many different disciplines, and so I focused on what I think they were leaving out, which is very much the neural pathways that are developed, the neural pathways that are not developed, and why our electricity in our brain flows effortlessly into our developed pathways, even when we don't want it to, and understanding our power to redirect it. So when you're talking about peak performance, so the idea would be that you have built a very big pathway to focus on what you want, despite the fact that you have all these other pathways that do what you don't want. And most peak performers focus on that by practice, but practice may be a physiological practice where you're practicing with your hands and your voice and your throat, but it might also be practice with your emotions. So that's, I think, the piece that you're focusing on,
Yeah.
and it's less obvious. And that's what the horse is, or any other example of how a person can build those circuits to have a circuit for the desired behavior. And it's really focus. It's being able to ignore other things while you're putting all of your focus into one thing.
That's amazing. And you're writing in your book that 45 is the magical number, right? So do this for 45 days and then you'll be fine.
Yes. Well, the idea is to build a new pathway is not so easy after puberty. Because before puberty, during puberty, and when you're under 8 years old, your brain has a lot of myelin. So our brain is really designed to build its major highways during those years. And after that, it takes a huge amount of repetition to build a new pathway. And I use the analogy that if you were traveling in the rainforest and you're trying to slash a new trail, it quickly grows over. So you have to pass the same trail every day in order for the trail to establish. Otherwise, you've lost all of your work. So whatever emotional circuit you're trying to build, if you could focus on it every day, which people often don't want to do because it is time consuming just because of the neurochemistry it brings up. So leave yourself time to do this when you want to make it a goal. Now, one other thing I haven't gotten to yet is dopamine. So let's talk about dopamine.
Yes.
So your brain releases dopamine when you expect a reward. And what your expectations are is totally a function of your old circuits. So, for example, when you were young, you learned to expect a reward for this, but some other thing you learned to not expect a reward. And every one of us is different based on our unique individual experience. But you can build new expectations in 45 days if you repeat the new behavior. So I'll stop there.
Yes. No, I love the analogy. It makes a lot of sense. And especially it tells, I hope it tells our viewers that whatever the starting point about your relationship with Spotlight, your relationship with stage, it's something that can be turned around if you put commitment and if you know how to do it. And if you create those neural pathways that are, at the end of the day, so important to get us where we need to be. But it takes commitment. That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. So one last question. It's more of a personal one. How did you get into, what sparked your interest for the mammal brain, of all things?
Of all things. Well, I always loved psychology and I always read what was coming along and new ideas. And evolutionary psychology started growing. And I would read one little mention here of how a chemical works in an animal, and another little mention here, but nobody was putting it together despite the enormous amount of attention. And I think the reason nobody's putting it together is that people want to have a warm and fuzzy view about the state of nature. And in academia, frankly, the other view is not tolerated, despite the fact that anyone who lives alongside animals knows that they have conflict. And that whole reality is being ignored. And I took early retirement from academia so that I could say what I want. And so that's what I'm doing. And also I put together, like I studied a lot of different methods of self-soothing and put them all together because, again, so many of them, they are also ignoring how we learn from past experience, because the current strategy is to tell people it's not your fault, it's the system's fault. It's not your fault, it's your genes. And I feel that it's very disempowering to not help people understand how their circuits got created from random chance of experience and how they could have power to create new circuits.
Yes, yes. I am grateful you did
Thank
what you did. This is a huge contribution to our field, if anything, to the classical music industry and for performing artists.
Great, great. Just want to mention that I have a new book out last month, which is called The Science of Positivity.
Fantastic. So, I didn't even know that, so thank you for mentioning that. Sure. And once again, for everybody, deepen your knowledge about all these things, if you will, at innermammalinstitute.org. There's a lot there, and there's a lot for us to learn. Loretta, thank you so very much for what you shared and for your work. We're really lucky to have you in this generation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Sure. Take care. Good luck.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.